days. I was expecting this to take a lot longer, so I was like, I'll start at like 3 minutes before, and it's actually worked a treat. Anytime I've done it, it's taken a lot longer. So thank you so much for joining me, Alex. It's really
Good to be
appreciate
here,
it.
Rob.
Re-
Yeah, good to be here again.
Yes. Now this is the start of what I like to call rebranding masculinity, and you're the first episode. I thought it was a great episode to join and to start with because what we're going to be speaking about today is something that impacts so many men and impacts so many people in the world. And it's a very interesting topic, especially in the male perspective, especially when we look at rebranding what it is to be a man. So, first of all, the people who do not know, I am Rob Hosking, former frontline police officer turned motivational TEDx speaker. And this is my good friend, Alex Staniforth, who is also a motivational speaker. He is also an adventurer, an all-round great person. And just you can just say hello, Alex, initially, and then we can crack on.
It's hi, everybody. Yeah, so I guess I'm also an adventurer. My journey is all about the outdoors and adversity and using that as a way to really overcome my life challenges. And I'm an author of 2 books. I started a charity 5 years ago, which is all around being outside and being in nature for our mental health. And yes, like you, I'm fortunate to, just talk about and share, my story so far around the world. And I talk a lot in the space of mental health. So I think this series is really important and really grateful for the platform to share my story. I've got a bad cold, so if I sound a bit like that, that's why I don't normally talk like this.
We'll let you off. We'll let you off. No, I really appreciate it. And we don't have much time, so we've got about half an hour to chat many things, but I'm sure we'll manage it. Now, the first thing I want to start off with is the statistics that exist, which I shared on my story a few days ago, but I'll share it again today because it's a great place to start. And there are between 1.25 and 3.4 million people in the UK are affected by an eating disorder, and around 25% of them are men. It's quite a significant number in general, never mind the ones who are impacted by men. I want to start with asking the question, Alex, what led to your eating disorder? What's your story with your eating disorder?
Yeah, sure. I think as well, it's worth saying on that stat that that's only because of all the men who actually are speaking about it. That number could be much, much higher, which is quite worrying. So my journey with eating disorders really began when I was about 16. So I was a runner. I've been very active since I've been a teenager, and running in the outdoors really defined me. It became my identity, and that was taken away from me when I got an injury in my shin. So suddenly I was unable to run and to cycle and do all these things for the best part of the year. And that could have been so much worse. But at 16, I didn't really have the tools and resilience that I do now to kind of deal with that. And it was quite terrifying. I'd never experienced that before. And because of that, I tried to find control in other areas of my life. And I was really struggling with anxiety and depression. And I was working in a kitchen at the time. Before I was a speaker, I was a pot washer. So it's
what a
come a long
story!
way.
What a story!
Well, we'll have to start somewhere, and I hope I never have to go back to being a pot washer. But so I was obviously very, I was surrounded by food, and also I've always been very much all or nothing type personality, and very much a perfectionist, which was kind of the perfect storm. And I think I found that control in a situation which felt out of my control by food. And, again, it's probably worth saying at this point, for anybody who's affected by this, I will be talking openly about it. So please, feel free if you need to just have a break or step away, because I will, it feels important to talk openly about this now. But, I started to, eat and binge eat. And that was my way of coping. And that was fine because I was quite active, because I was, young and fit. It was less of an issue. But that got so out of control that I then realized, oh, if I made myself sick, I could almost have my cake and eat it. And that was then bulimia. And bulimia was something I dealt with for 8 years, and it really controlled a big part of my life. And I'm lucky I'm now recovered. But yeah, what a journey that is. What a journey.
Yes, I bet I can only imagine, and it's an interesting one because I grew up in this household, this military household, where whenever there was a plate to eat and I didn't finish it, it was why you're not eating. You need to finish it. And I felt like I had a poor relationship with food, obviously not to the extent you had, but I always had this idea that men had to finish their food, men had to eat so much. And I was always actually chastised for not eating tons and, oh,
Yeah.
oh, you're skinny or all these different things I'd get called. And I then started having a poor relationship with food in that way where I didn't want to eat tons because I just it wasn't who I was. And I was made to feel bad about it. So I was always that person who ate small things regularly rather than a massive meal. But as men or whoever, that's not acceptable. And now, we've changed that. But growing up, I
Mhm.
always felt like there's something wrong with me because I didn't finish a meal. And that was just a little example of just having a poor relationship with food. Never mind, yours is the extreme
Mhm.
relationship and poor relationship with food. And I guess so for you, what was the trigger where you realized this is unhealthy and I have to do something about this?
I guess quite early on, I knew something this clearly wasn't healthy, it
Yeah.
wasn't normal. At that point, I obviously didn't anticipate that this one-off, like, I guess, release was going to trigger an 8-year illness, and that's the real thing about men and, eating disorders is actually we don't accept it as an illness, just like any illness that we may otherwise have. Um, I think the trigger was when I couldn't
Okay.
stop it. I couldn't stop this kind of binge purge cycle. And then I started to research it, and then I kind of knew it had a name. And then, okay, well, originally I thought, well, when I get back to running, this will stop. But it didn't stop
Okay.
because I kept doing this thing just to cope with stress, even good events. Any kind of emotion, I kind of had this really unhealthy cycle. Um, and and then it's when I was unable to stop it, that was when I realized this was something that was going to need some help. This wasn't just another challenge that I could deal with on my own. Um, but at that point, I didn't anticipate really just the
Yeah.
scale of the challenge.
And what if you had to put it down as, I know this is difficult, but one thing that made you really struggle with overcoming it, what was that? I know that's difficult.
I mean, I think the real challenge is the nature of the illness and how it very much is like wiring in the
Yeah.
brain. It's not just about willpower and discipline, because if it was about willpower and discipline, I think given the things I do, I'm pretty good at that, and I'm pretty good at kind of mental strength. And that's why I talk about it now, to show men that it's not a weakness or a flaw of character. It is a genuine addiction, like in the brain, similar to, drugs or alcohol. It's hitting all the same kind of systems. And I think it was that, and accepting that actually I couldn't just outthink it. I had to unwire the problem. And that was the challenging thing, because I know this is wrong, but why can't I stop? That was the real hard thing.
Okay. And how, right, so I'll go into this actually later. This is a bigger question, but I've heard you say this before. You did an article about it and you said that hiding the disorder is exactly what the demons want. And I thought that was a very powerful sentence that you used there to
Mm-hmm.
describe it. For men who are afraid to speak up, what's the biggest advice? What's the turning point that helped you? Because there's two sides to this, isn't there? There's the side of actually overcoming the eating disorder,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's also that side of speaking openly about it. Never mind, as a
Yeah.
man, speaking openly about it. And I think there are two different challenges. Speaking about it is hard enough, and accepting it is hard enough. Never mind being a man in that point of view. How did you get through that? What was your mindset, first of all, of being a man with a eating disorder? Were you embarrassed? Did you feel like, I can't have an eating disorder? I'm a man. Like, this isn't
Mm-hmm.
right. What was your viewpoint of that?
I think my viewpoint was that because I was always this adventurer, this athlete, this mentally tough person that does all these big, amazing mountain challenges and expeditions, and therefore, why on earth have I got this? Why do I need this? And it wasn't so much necessarily about being a man, but more about just who I was and the things I
Okay.
did and what I was known for. But for sure, when I did start to look for help and research this thing and try to fix it myself, all of the examples I found primarily were female, and therefore I started to think there's something wrong with me personally, and there was a real lack of male role models that I could relate to that were talking about this. And And there was one guy I did find, and he was instrumental to my recovery. I can talk more about that in a bit. But I think there was this element of, I'm expected to be, therefore why? And to your point before as well, so much of our society now really, really reinforces this. So as an athlete, I've always been very tall, very thin, just by design. I'm very lucky in that way. And therefore, people couldn't see anything wrong with me. People were kind of saying things like, oh, I can eat anything I want. I'm young, I'm fit, why am I concerned? And therefore, like you, I also had very much an upbringing. I was always really well fed, and I'm really fortunate. And therefore, it was very hard to kind of avoid food, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, someone just put something. With families, for me, it's a generation thing. Grandparents offer 4 courses, and I grow up and asked to finish my food. Parents are sustainable. Serve yourself and go back for more if you like it. Yeah, that's the grandparents, isn't it? Like
grandparents, generation. Yeah, I get it.
We blame the grandparents, but it's true. Like, we always have this idea where you have to finish your meal, and I always find myself force feeding myself sometimes to do it, and it just made me sick. I just didn't enjoy it, but I didn't see any other alternative. That was what that's what a man did, so that's what I did. It's very interesting. Your whole story is very interesting, but you said you find no male role models that were going through what you did, apart from that one person who really, really helped you. Why? We talked about the statistics. 25% of that number are men who are suffering with an eating disorder. Why are men not speaking about having it? What is the barrier? What do you think is the barrier?
I think I can only speak from my own experience, and I think it is some of what I mentioned before around expectations and matching up to images and perceptions. Very much it's seen as a female issue, and therefore, a man typically wouldn't want to therefore own up to having something that is typically misunderstood. And even when I found that talking about anxiety and depression was actually very, not easy, but it was quite straightforward. People seem to get it and understand it. But when I mention eating disorder, even my male friends will be a bit like uncomfortable, a bit kind of squirmy in the seats, and I think it can only be that societal image and matching up to that and what we see and what we believe and what we perceive. But actually what I found in reality was that actually I wasn't the only one. And it may be aimed, or kind of, it may be more prevalent in females given the different kinds of pressures, but actually I see this a lot in sport and in running in particular. There's a lot of focus around calories and burning what and burning what we eat, and being able to stay thin, stay fast, and stay lean. And actually you can see that's a perfect storm there to happen. And I think in sport especially there's a real vulnerability there.
100%. I completely agree with everything you're saying. And now I want to look into how can we change it? Because this whole thing's about rebranding masculinity, rebranding what it means to be a man, and especially a modern day man. Body image is a big thing, and eating disorders come under body image. And I feel like with males especially, body image isn't talked enough about, because women, of course, they go through their difficulties with the body image, and they see the magazines and what it's like to be a woman. Apparently men, it's not spoken about enough. We see it on Men's Health. They are ripped, they've got their six packs, they've got everything. And wherever, or even on Love Island, you look at Love Island and most of them are this chiseled person. That has to impact why we don't also speak about our relationship with food, because obviously food will impact our body image. That has to all be linked, because men and body image, it's not spoken about enough, but it impacts so many of us. And I'm just speaking from my experience, and I'm you yourself too. It impacts us, yet we aren't speaking enough about it. Why is it still that this body image is still seen as this is what the perfect man looks like, and it's not changing when the woman idea and the woman perspective is changing a little bit more? Why are we men not keeping up?
I think women in general are better at talking about things.
That's a big thing. Yeah.
We should learn a lot from them. I think, I don't know, for me, it's less so much of a body image issue. It's more of a general self-perception issue.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've never really aspired so much to look like one of those, you know, people. You know, I just want to run faster and run stronger, and therefore to do that, I'm actually built the right way. You know, and you know, I'm less concerned personally around appearance and that image internalized, but I can see how a lot of men are, and they value that a lot more than I would. Why we're not talking about it, I think because there is so much society reinforcing what will happen if we do. And actually, that is not really as common or as true as it used to be. But it takes time to change beliefs and to challenge those fears. And I think there's a massive increase of people speaking about this. And, you know, you're an example of that, you know, speaking, you know, about your own experiences openly. And there's more of us doing it now. But I think it's going to take time for that to kind of work its way through. And I don't know, society changes so fast. We are probably more exposed to social media than we ever have been. And that's another reason why we're probably not going to talk about it, because we assume we are the only one that is thinking this way. And that is something wrong with us. So it's really not surprising people put that kind of mirror up to themselves. But to answer your question, I don't really know. I don't know, but I think there's just a few ideas.
Yeah, no, that's all very good. So it's a question that probably not many of us know the answer to, and it's something that will evolve. And you know, I always say when I give my talks and stuff about men's mental health that it is such a generational thing where that generational trauma has been passed down with mental health, and you know we're not that far from two world wars, and that trauma that people saw got impacted, it got brought down to their generation, then they were raised by traumatic people, and then they took on their trauma, and then they raised other traumatic people. It's the vicious cycle, and as we go on as generations, the trauma is becoming less and less. And as you say, I think it will just take time, but people like you speaking about it can only help. So I appreciate you even coming on and agreeing to this today, never mind doing what you do as a profession. Now, we're going to go into the recovery. Let's talk recovery, which is good. But
Yeah.
I want to know first, you know, you say people often don't know how to respond when you open up about bulimia. So what is the best and the worst ways people have reacted when you've shared your experience with them?
I mean, the reality is I didn't share it with a lot of people first for that reason. And it took me probably 5 years to even do that point. And it almost been like I kind of got found out. You know, my family kind of started to suspect things after being very, very good at hiding it. And it is very much, I think bulimia is really challenging because you can be a very healthy weight and still have it, whereas anorexia is obviously a very different situation. And interestingly, when I had a period of that as well, obviously people started to really see that. And again, it was my grandma, you know, telling me, you know, I need to eat more. Obviously, not like that simple grandma, you know. But I think one of the worst things people can do, I think, is just to really be uncomfortable, or at least to look uncomfortable and not even say anything. The very worst thing would be to dismiss it, you know, because it takes somebody a hell of a lot of energy and courage to actually talk about that. They may have been waiting for months or years to do that. But actually, some of the best is just be kind, be compassionate. I mean, I remember telling my GP, and I think I just broke down into tears. You know, all that weight just came off, and she looks a bit surprised, but not in a negative way. Like she just had the ultimate compassion, and you know, I'm not claiming to understand or know anything, but actually just feeling heard and you know, congratulating me for actually doing that. That was probably the best way. But I think the worst thing would be to joke about it, would be to dismiss it. If you don't understand it, if you do feel uncomfortable, just say, that sounds really challenging. You know, I'm really sorry to hear that you've been going through that. Don't always try to fix anything. Don't try to fix what you can't understand.
That's
you
great.
know, and I think it's really challenging, but I think acknowledging their bravery, their courage, I think is really important.
I completely agree. And, you know, when we try to fix people with whenever they're suffering for whatever it may be, it's coming from a place of love. But in fact, it's actually doing more harm than good. So I think it's a great point where don't try to fix it. And when I was a police officer dealing with all the mental health crisis that I dealt with, it wasn't my job to fix it. I just had to be an ear. I just had to listen to people,
Mhm.
because listening to people just get something off their chest is the biggest thing that they want, and it's the biggest help that they can get. Yes, then they'll get the professional help they need after that. But being that first person to be that ear, to be that shoulder to cry on, is massive. And once
Mhm.
you have that, it's like it just snowballs, doesn't it? Where once you feel that safety and you feel heard, and
Yeah.
you feel that your issue, whatever it may be, is actually validated, and you're like, okay, yes, you know what? I'm not just by myself. I'm not just thinking about this all in here. It's
Mhm.
actually validated, and that really goes a long way. So you said that so your doctor really helped, which is great, because some doctors have heard many times where they maybe just brush over things and they just want to get to the next patient. So it's brilliant that they listen. What about this? You said one guy was very influential on your recovery. Tell me a little bit about him and how that looked.
Yeah, I think as well it's worth just add there that actually it's heartbreaking to hear when people have a bad experience with their doctor, because that will put them off.
100%.
And I was really fortunate that I had really good support, and that support is out there. Maybe it won't come first or second time, but you will find it. Um, I remember quite vividly. I was in Manchester Piccadilly
Okay.
Station, and I was reading the Guardian. I don't often read the Guardian, but I was reading the Guardian, and um, there's an article by a guy called Tom Fairbrother, who was also a marathon runner, a lot faster than myself, but he was a sub elite runner, and he was talking about his own experience of bulimia, and I just completely related to the whole thing. Like I got it, and there was that life trigger, and using food and exercise is it's a really dangerous combination, because you obviously they both go hand in hand, and people say, oh, I'm exercising to earn my cake, for example, but actually when one of them is out of balance, it becomes very, very unhealthy. Um, and I remember reading the comments in the article thinking that, oh, he's going to get lots of trolls and abuse, and I only saw the exact opposite, and I saw how people were praising and thanking
Nice.
him for that honesty and that openness, and I started to feel, well, what if I could have that same effect on people? And also, um, that openness made me feel like I wasn't alone. So how could I help the people with that same thing? Um, and that was when I decided to talk about it, and I eventually realized I needed to see my doctor after a few years of trying everything myself, every self-help book, and realizing this just wasn't working. And that was the first shift in my head that actually this was an illness. It wasn't a character flaw, and actually I could use my experience as
Yeah.
a force for good, and yeah, the first time was terrifying. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But now I can talk about it openly on Instagram Live. I can talk about it in front of hundreds of people, because it just feels like another of the challenges I've had to face. And because I know that there could be other people hearing
Yeah.
that have that same shift. Um, so it was just that power of one article, really, and knowing that there's other men in the same place.
That's the thing. It's usually that one thing that just sparks something within us, and when this is why it's so important for men, especially, and just society in general, to open up, open communication. Although people might hear it all the time and like, yes, yes, I'm sure it does work. It really does work, because
Mm.
once we are brave enough to open up about how we feel, all of a sudden you see so many people say, oh, you know what, I feel the same. Oh, you know what, I've been through something similar. They can help you, or you can help them. The marvelous thing about connection in building resilience, and I remember reading something recently, and it said that we can become more resilient in the process of connecting with others in our most challenging of times. Don't
Yeah.
just think you need resilience within yourself. That's not, yes, we'll all have an inner fortitude, I'm sure, but that's not the only side of resilience. Connection is massive, and no matter what we're going through, connecting with others is key, however that may look. And there's unfortunately some people out there that won't have that, network of support. For people like that, what do you think when they don't have that network of friends or family, whether they're strained or they just feel like they cannot open up? What do you think? What's your advice to those people?
I mean, you can find connection in the most unlikely places. I mean, one of the benefits of social media is exactly that, and I find whenever I post stuff on Instagram, for example, where I'm sharing quite openly, people will comment or message and say, "Oh, thank you for sharing that. I can relate X, Y, Z." Um, So social media does have some benefits, including this. There are charities, there are groups out there that can give you that support network of like-minded people, and actually you have that thing in common because you have perhaps this challenge or this illness that other people have had, and you realize actually everybody's dealing with something. Everybody has got something going on, and until you start speaking about it, you don't realize. I remember when I posted a blog about this, which again was pretty terrifying.
It was a good blog.
It
was a good blog. I read it.
Thank you. It was a long time ago now, but like, I was like, what on earth have I done? But actually, so many people I didn't even expect were commenting saying, "Oh, I thought I was the only one," and actually, I then saw them posting blogs about theirs, and they said, it was your blog that gave me the courage to do it. So there is that multiplier effect, and I think, the hardest part is the first step. But I think what was also key in my recovery was finding something that meant more to me, and realizing that I couldn't do all those things with this illness. I needed to have a reason to fight it, and I only wish I'd done it sooner, and that's the only thing I can say to people is it is an illness that needs treatment like anything else.
Yeah, 100%. And how much, obviously I know adventure means so much to you, and especially with your mental health. With an eating disorder, how did that bring you back? How did that help you, the role of adventure?
I mean, as I said, like, they went very much hand in hand for a long time. Like, to the point I even remember being on expedition in the Himalayas, being in a tent at like nearly 6,000 meters, binge eating. And that wasn't because I needed to. That wasn't fuel for the expedition. That was purely emotional, and there was a real difference there. And I never ever thought I was going to break that cycle. I was reading all the self-help books while I was on the expedition trying to climb 8,000 meter peak. So and that again hopefully is an example that it's not a barrier to achievement, and it's not a sign of weakness. But I think adventure gave me my reason to fight back. And I remember I was doing a talk in Bristol. It was 2019, and I think it was just after my second book, which ironically was all around eating disorders and the outdoors. And I remember going for a run, and it's one of many runs where I just felt completely just dead. I had no energy because I was so underfueled, so obsessed with food. And I was utterly miserable to the point that I just couldn't function. And I remember that night, I just went for a massive meal in Bristol. I just had everything I'd been depriving myself for so long. And the world didn't end. And that weekend, I won a 10K race. And it's like, okay, that means more to me than this thing I don't need anymore, So it gave me goals. It gave me purpose. And when you go outside the mountains, it's hard not to feel a bit more hopeful about things.
I love it. And that's the joy of finding purpose in things. It can help with so many different things. Last question. What is the advice to anybody else out there who are suffering with an eating disorder? What's the advice, one bit of advice that you wish you had knew straight away that you'd like to give to them?
I mean, recovery felt impossible for a long time. It really did. And you think that you may be an exception to that rule. I would say that it's absolutely possible. I'm fully recovered now, and I'm able to not calorie count, able to do all the things I used to do, able to run very strong without having to weigh myself or anything like that. I think it is purely to accept that recovery is possible, but we can't do that on our own. We can't do that on our own. And it may not happen overnight, but actually it's so worth it. It really is.
I think it's a beautiful way to end, just to say that even if you do not think that you are going to beat something, there will always be that light at the end of the tunnel that will eventually appear. You just have to keep going and find the different ways to get to that light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you so much, Alex, for being part of the first episode of Rebranding Masculinity and talking so openly and sharing great advice for people that if anybody is suffering, please do reach out to friends, family, or get the professional help you need. And as you say, connections everywhere. We just have to be willing to look for it. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks everyone who has joined us for our first episode. I think it's a great series, Rob, and it's going to go. I appreciate it as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Lovely to
Thank
see you.
you.
Bye, bye, bye.
Cheers, everyone.